Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Market Update, where we discuss leading financial and economic developments in Asia, Europe, and North America. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And first up, US President Donald Trump welcomed Japan's Economic Revitalization Minister, Ryosei Akazawa, to the White House on Wednesday, calling the discussion, quote, big progress, end quote, and reaffirming that Japan remains a top trade priority for his administration. Japan used the meeting to deliver a firm message. US tariffs are hurting investor confidence and must be reconsidered. Akazawa, accompanied by senior officials from Japan's Finance, Trade and Foreign Affairs ministries, met for Trump for 40 minutes before joining cabinet-level talks with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. While Akazawa declined to share detailed outcomes, he emphasized Japan's regret over the full slate of tariffs, especially the 24% reciprocal tariffs and 25% duties on autos and metal goods. He strongly urged the US to revise these measures. The two sides agreed to reconvene for further talks later this month, though it remains unclear if the next meeting will be in person or virtual. Trump has linked tariff relief to Japan's willingness to shoulder more of the burden for US military bases, suggesting that security goals could well be part of the trade talks with other countries. Quote, hopefully something can be worked out which is great for Japan and the USA, end quote, he wrote on Truth Social after expressing frustration over Japan's defense contributions. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, speaking from Tokyo, described the meeting as constructive but acknowledged that a, quote, gap, end quote, remains. He said Japan is prepared to explore concessions such as more US car and LNG imports, but ruled out currency commitments. Akazawa did not address military cost sharing directly. US officials have also floated the idea of using tariff negotiations to isolate China, a strategy that could complicate Japan's position, in which we unpacked on yesterday's episode of China Update, my other channel. Ishiba hinted that Tokyo may coordinate with allies like the UK and Southeast Asian nations rather than accept a bilateral deal under pressure. With President Trump demanding personal sign-off on any trade deal, the outcome remains uncertain. Both sides signaled a willingness to keep talking. Now, before we move on to developments in North America, we have one more Asian update to cover. Vietnam has launched its most ambitious government reform in nearly 4 decades, aiming to halve the number of provinces and slash civil servant positions by 20% by 2030. The sweeping plan, approved under Resolution 60 by Communist Party General Secretary To Lam, also eliminates an entire layer of district government and cuts 30% of administrative procedures. The number of provinces will fall from 63 to 34, and over 60% will have direct access to the sea, a move expected to boost port access, trade and tourism. Authorities hope these changes will attract investment and spur faster economic growth. The restructuring comes as Vietnam targets 8% growth in 2025 and 10% in subsequent years, despite global trade headwinds. Of course, Vietnam has been hit by very high tariffs from the US, and it's no surprise that they were one of the first to move for trade talks with the United States. The US is its biggest export market. The country's economy, which has grown 96-fold since the 1986 Doi Moi reforms, is now among the fastest growing in the Southeast Asian region. The IMF predicts Vietnam's GDP will surpass Thailand and Malaysia by 2028. The overhaul also includes a push to digitize government services, streamline bureaucracy, and cut red tape that currently burdens businesses. Leaders aim to make civil service more effective and competitive with the private sector, which they believe will reduce corruption. While some fear job losses and initial disruptions, many Vietnamese citizens and companies welcome the reforms as a path to higher incomes and better governance. With further legislation expected in coming months, To Lam's drive marks a critical juncture as Vietnam eyes 2045 as the year it becomes a high-income nation. As a communist country, this may be difficult to achieve, but these latest reforms are certainly moves in a good direction. Let's move now to North America. A sharp technology-led sell-off rattled US markets on yesterday, deepening investor concerns over intensifying trade restrictions and uncertain monetary policy. The Nasdaq tumbled 3.1%, dragged down by heavyweight Nvidia, which plunged 6.9% after warning it would take a $5.5 billion charge due to new US export restrictions. We also discussed this in yesterday's episode of China Update. The Trump administration announced late Tuesday that Nvidia's H20 processors, designed to comply with previous export controls, would now require special licenses for shipment to China and other regions. Rival chipmaker AMD was also hit with similar curbs, fueling broader concern about the global technology supply chain. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell added to the market's unease, warning that the central bank faces, quote, difficult trade-offs, end quote, in responding to the economic fallout from escalating tariff tensions. Investors had hoped for more clarity on potential interest rate cuts, but were left disappointed, contributing to a sharp midday sell-off. At its lowest point, the Nasdaq had fallen more than 4.4% before a late-session rebound trimmed losses. The S&P 500 closed down 2.2%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 1.7%. Wednesday's turbulence extended beyond technology. ASML, a key supplier of advanced chip-making equipment, slumped 5.2% after reporting weaker-than-expected orders and citing tariff-related uncertainty. Meanwhile, new data showed US retail sales surged 1.4% in March as consumers rushed to buy vehicles before auto tariffs took effect. The move, though temporarily boosting economic activity, underscored the disruptive effect of looming trade policies. Volatility returned to Wall Street as well, with the volatility index jumping 8% after a brief period of calm. The US dollar also weakened, extending a multi-day decline. Meanwhile, California Governor Gavin Newsom has launched a legal challenge against President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff regime, filing a lawsuit in San Francisco federal court that targets Trump's use of emergency powers to impose levies on imports from Mexico, China, Canada, and elsewhere. Newsom, joined by Attorney General Rob Bonta, argues that the tariffs threaten California's economy, especially in agriculture, technology, and entertainment sectors, and were enacted without proper legal authority or congressional approval. The lawsuit challenges Trump's invocation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 1977 law typically used for financial sanctions, not tariffs. Trump used the statute to justify import levies in response to issues like undocumented immigration and trade deficits, a move California argues is an abuse of presidential power. Quote, President Trump's tariffs have already wiped out billions in market value, destabilized investment, and triggered recession fears, end quote, Newsom said, adding that California, the world's fifth largest economy if it were a country, could suffer outsized harm. The state exported $24 billion in agricultural goods in 2022 alone. The White House dismissed the lawsuit as political, accusing Newsom of ignoring local crises. But the stakes are high. California economists have already downgraded growth forecasts and raised concerns about job losses and inflation. This marks the latest in a series of legal and political challenges to US President Donald Trump's trade agenda. We are certainly living in interesting times. The world is going through a transformative period, and we are very much living history. If you want to be on top of the most consequential developments as they happen, consider subscribing to Market Update, hit the bell notification icon, and you will be. And if you're enjoying today's episode of Market Update, don't forget to hit the like button. And finally for today, US Vice President J.D. Vance has said there is a, quote, good chance, end quote, the United States and United Kingdom will strike a trade deal as negotiations between the two nations intensify in the wake of President Donald Trump's sweeping global tariffs. Vance's comments, delivered in an interview with outlet Unheard, signal growing momentum for an agreement amid market volatility and shifting trade alliances. The UK is seen as having a more balanced trade relationship with the United States compared to European heavyweights like Germany, which Vance noted, quote, export heavily to the US, end quote, but restrict American imports. His remarks bolster UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer's push to maintain stability and deepen economic ties with Washington without escalating trade tensions. While the UK avoided the harshest of Trump's new tariffs, it was hit with just a 10% baseline tariff. It continues to face steep duties on key exports like steel and autos. UK Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds called the tariffs, quote, disappointing, end quote, and reaffirmed Britain's commitment to reducing trade barriers. Vance, meanwhile, defended Trump's tariff-first strategy as a, quote, long-term play, end quote, aimed at rebalancing trade deficits. Despite stock market turbulence and European concerns, he emphasized the need for allies to strengthen their own defenses and reduce reliance on US security guarantees. As regular viewers of Market Update will know, the Europeans have, in the last several weeks, indeed greatly increased their commitments, through not just words but finally actions, to their own defence, with defence spending surging across the continent and defence company stock prices surging with them. Okay, that is today's episode of Market Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Thursday. For those Christians who celebrate it, have a good Easter this weekend, and I will see you all tomorrow on Friday.